There's always been a yearning by content creators and by directors and game makers to do more with the medium. But their visions, as we know where science fiction comes from, have often outpaced the technology. Today we want to close that gap dramatically by enabling movie makers and gamers to go where they've never been before. We believe Cinema 2.0 is part of that. It's just a whole new way of thinking about it. In fact, when it comes to whole new ways of thinking about it, there's one guy probably did more than anyone has ever done. Really imagined and boldly went where no one had been before. That, of course, was legendary American screenwriter and producer Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the science fiction universe that is Star Trek. It's now with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce Trevor Roth, the Chief Operating Officer of Rodenberry Productions. Trevor's going to spend a few minutes with us discussing Gene's vision and what he might think of this technology. Trevor.
First of all, I'd like to thank Nigel and AMD and Jules for inviting us here today. That having known Eugene and the Roddenberry family for over half of my lifetime, they're well aware of what a momentous occasion it is and wish they could be here. In 1964, Gene Roddenberry had an idea. And this idea was something that he was very enthusiastic about. He was a military veteran, he was a flying enthusiast, and he sold this idea to Desilu Studios. In 1966, the very first Star Trek episode aired. And since then, this idea has spawned 6 different television series, including 1 animated, as well as 10 different movies with another one on the way. There is no question that Star Trek is an entertainment phenomenon. But Star Trek was more than entertainment. Star Trek actually inspired people. Millions of people around the world heard the call of Star Trek. Millions of people were influenced and felt that they could go beyond their perceived limitations due to Star Trek. In fact, Star Trek provided an idea of a world in which famine and geopolitical strife and war were something of the past. Star Trek also helped us understand that the technological advancements of the day and those to come can be a great way to help us get to this amazing future. Science fiction and technology for us have always been tremendously intertwined, and I think many people today have spoken to this fact. But if you take the idea that Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek are an example of this, you can well see that there's a cycle and a symbiotic relationship between science and science fiction. Gene Roddenberry, if you don't know, took a lot of time to investigate the world around him. Gene Roddenberry surrounded himself with scientists and NASA experts and engineers so that he could be well aware of what was going on with advancements of his time. That would allow Gene to extrapolate from the reality of things and bring those things and embed them into his shows and his technologies so that he could bring you the great science fiction that he did. Gene also reciprocated this. It was a cyclical. If you take a look at the cell phone, if you take a look at inventions like the all-knowing computer we call the internet, if you realize that recently a proton was beamed from one location to another, utilizing a piece of technology and machinery very similar to Star Trek's transporter, you realize that this cycle is ongoing and forever. One idea that Gene actually had was the holodeck. And in 1974, the holodeck made its debut in Star Trek, the animated series. It was only in 1 episode, but it was so well received that it came back in full force once the next generation came about. This piece of machinery was so intriguing to people that it almost became a character within the episodes and within the Star Trek world, and was utilized heavily within every other series after that point. If you think about the idea of where this could go and what this has to do to today, it's amazing how Gene's ideas might be able to come to life. The holodeck essentially was a place on the starship where you could go and enjoy and explore. It was a room of possibility and adventure. The holodeck allowed you to see any place in time and in history. The holodeck allowed you to visit your favorite characters, experience your favorite stories, and it did it in such a real way that the human senses couldn't decide which was real and which was not. I think it's pretty obvious to many of us in this room that Gene Roddenberry was most assuredly a visionary. And I think it's pretty safe to say that if Gene Roddenberry were here today, he would be awestruck by the technological advancements that have occurred since his passing. We are clearly taking steps to move towards the idea of making things like the holodeck a reality. I personally can only imagine the capabilities and possibilities and experiences we might be able to provide as we move towards such a device becoming a reality for people like filmmakers, people like Roddenberry Productions, people like game makers, the audiences, the game players for years to come, and what we can provide to them in a very real way. You know, Gene Roddenberry used to have a saying when people would ask him about Star Trek, and I think if he were here today recognizing humanity's mere contemplation of the idea of creating such technology, his words would be very appropriate. People used to ask him, Gene, when you were creating Star Trek, did you understand what you were creating? Did you realize the millions and millions of people that you would be affecting? Did you understand how long this amazing enterprise would last? And Gene would smirk and sarcastically say, of course, just the way I planned it. Well, I'm here to tell you that, and Gene, wherever you are, thanks to AMD and people like Jules Urbach, that Gene's vision is well in hand. We are right on track. And Gene, it's occurring just the way you planned it. Thank you.